In 1997, a company based out of a converted garage in Skokie, Illinois, controlled over a quarter of the entire North American modem market. If you dialed into the early internet in the 1990s, that screeching, beeping sound before your browser finally connected, there's a real chance the device making that noise had this company's name printed on the front. That same year, it also happened to own a tiny handheld computer division that almost nobody at the company took seriously. Within 3 years, the company that built its name on modems would be gone, sold for parts. And the tiny side project nobody cared about, the PalmPilot, would briefly become worth more on paper than the entire rest of the business combined. This is the story of US Robotics, the modem giant that connected millions of Americans to the internet for the first time and then got treated as an afterthought by the very deal that erased its independence. Named, appropriately enough, after the fictional robotics company from Isaac Asimov's science fiction, this is how US Robotics actually ended. Welcome back to Boardroom Ruins, where we dig into the companies that built entire industries and then watch those industries move on without them. If you've been here before, you know how this goes. No fluff, no filler, just the real decisions, the real numbers, and the real moments where it all started to come apart. If you're new, consider this your warning. Once you start seeing how these collapses actually happen, you start noticing the same patterns everywhere. Hit subscribe now, because you're going to want to see the next one. All right, back to the story. The company was founded in 1976 in a garage in Skokie, Illinois by Casey Cowell and 4 partners. The name, US Robotics, was a deliberate reference to US Robots and Mechanical Men, the fictional robotics company that appears throughout Isaac Asimov's science fiction stories. The company launched its first actual modem product in 1979, a piece of hardware that let computers communicate with each other over ordinary telephone lines, at a time when almost no household had any reason to own one. Early on, US Robotics found real traction specifically within bulletin board systems, the pre-internet dial-up hobbyist networks where enthusiasts exchanged files and messages. Its high-speed HST protocol made file transfers over one popular network, FidoNet, noticeably faster than rival modems could manage, building US Robotics a devoted following among exactly the technical early adopters most likely to spread word of a superior product. US Robotics went public in 1991, and through the 1990s built 2 major product lines that would define its identity: the Courier, a business-class modem line prized for reliability, and the Sportster, a lower-cost consumer line that became a genuinely ubiquitous brand name in American households. The company competed directly against other major modem makers of the era, Hayes Microcomputer Products, the company that had essentially invented the modern smart modem, and Telebit. US Robotics developed a real reputation for high build quality and for rapidly supporting the latest communication standards as they emerged. As the World Wide Web exploded in popularity through the mid-1990s, US Robotics was positioned close to perfectly. In 1996, the company controlled over 1/4 of the entire North American modem market, and its earnings had grown 158% over the previous year alone. In early 1997, US Robotics launched something called the X2, a 56 kilobit per second modem, ahead of its competitors, letting consumers download data at 56,000 bits per second, a significant jump over the 28,800 bits per second that had been standard just a short time before. In 1995, as part of a broader growth strategy, US Robotics acquired several smaller companies, including Megahertz, a modem card maker, ISDN Systems, and a small, financially struggling handheld computer startup called Palm Computing, for roughly $44 million. Palm's own founders, Jeff Hawkins, Donna Dubinsky, and Ed Colligan, later described the sale almost as a rescue. Palm had nearly gone out of business entirely after an earlier failed hardware partnership, and had just $3 million left in the bank when US Robotics stepped in. It turned out to be one of the more fortunate side bets in tech history. In March 1996, Palm launched the Pilot 1000 as a division of US Robotics. By December 1997, Newsweek had crowned the PalmPilot its high-tech gizmo of the year. At the time, though, this was still very much treated as a minor addition to the business. US Robotics' identity, revenue, and reputation were built entirely on modems. Nobody inside the company yet understood they were quietly holding the more valuable asset.
By 1997, U.S. robotics' rapid growth had caught the attention of 3Com Corporation, the second largest computer networking company in the United States, behind Cisco Systems. 3Com's chairman and CEO, Eric Benhamou, saw an acquisition of U.S. robotics as a bold, direct challenge to Cisco's dominance, a way to instantly add modems and remote access hardware to 3Com's existing networking product line. 3Com initially offered around $6.6 billion. The deal faced real shareholder opposition at first, but 3Com completed its purchase of U.S. robotics in July 1997 in a transaction ultimately valued at approximately $8.5 billion, at the time the largest networking industry merger in history. According to people who worked on the deal from 3Com's side, the acquisition target wasn't really the modem business at all. What 3Com actually wanted was U.S. robotics' concentrator business, the large communications equipment sold to internet service providers and telephone companies. "We didn't want the modems," one 3Com executive later admitted bluntly. The single most iconic, recognizable part of U.S. robotics' brand identity was, from 3Com's own perspective, close to an afterthought. The timing of the deal turned out to be almost exactly wrong on multiple fronts at once. Faster alternative internet access technologies, cable modems, and digital subscriber line or DSL connections were already being developed, and many analysts at the time were openly predicting the eventual demise of the analog dial-up modem entirely. Meanwhile, the concentrator business 3Com had actually won connections gradually took over that market. 3Com found itself managing a combined company burdened by massive excess modem inventory, real difficulty integrating two very different product lines, and a wave of shareholder lawsuits stemming directly from the acquisition as 3Com's own market value began sliding. And there, quietly inside all of it, sat Palm, the side project nobody had originally cared about, which by the 1998-1999 fiscal year was generating $570 million in sales, close to 10% of 3Com's total revenue, and had captured a genuinely dominant 70% share of the entire handheld computer market.
Palm's own leadership grew increasingly frustrated that 3Com wouldn't simply spin the division off as an independent company, free to move at its own pace. In 1998, Palm co-founders Donna Dubinsky and Jeff Hawkins left 3Com entirely over exactly this disagreement, founding a rival company, Handspring, built around licensed Palm software. 3Com eventually relented. In March 2000, it began spinning off Palm through an IPO, and Palm's opening day valuation reached a staggering $53 billion. After the spin-off, 3Com still owned roughly 80% of Palm, and yet in one of the strangest moments in dot-com-era stock history, Palm's market value on its own briefly exceeded the market value of its own parent company. That same year, 3Com also spun the original U.S. robotics modem business back out, this time as a joint venture with Taiwan's Acton Technology and Singapore's Natsteel Electronics, oddly reclaiming the U.S. robotics name for what remained of the analog modem operation, now a smaller, standalone entity in an already declining market. The company that had once controlled over a quarter of the North American modem market and connected an entire generation of Americans to the early internet had effectively been dismantled and redistributed. Modems in one direction, Palm in another, inside a deal that was never really about the modems to begin with. So what actually happened to U.S. robotics? In a strange way, U.S. robotics wasn't really destroyed by a bad decision of its own. It was absorbed into somebody else's strategic bet, one that was fundamentally aimed at a different part of its business entirely. The concentrator business 3Com actually wanted shrank anyway, as broadband made it less relevant. The modem brand 3Com considered a footnote, the actual heart of U.S. robotics' identity for 2 decades, got spun back out into a smaller, diminished version of itself. And Palm, the side acquisition nobody originally valued, briefly became worth more than everything else combined. There's a real irony worth sitting with. U.S. Robotics is the company that connected an entire generation of Americans to the internet for the first time. The sound of its own modems dialing up was for years the actual sound of getting online, and it lost its independence in a deal that barely cared about that legacy at all. The U.S. robotics name does technically still exist today, now under Unicom Global, serving a small, specialized niche market, a fraction of what it once was, a name still on shelves, disconnected from the company that built it. Sometimes a company doesn't get killed by a rival, or a scandal, or even its own mistake. Sometimes it just gets bought for the wrong reason, by someone who never really understood what they were actually buying. If you found this one interesting, we've also covered 3Com, the company that bought U.S. robotics, and eventually met a strikingly similar fate itself. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one.